Folks say confession is good for the soul, but I reckon that's just something preachers tell you to sleep better at night. Truth is, some secrets eat at a man's insides like cancer, growing bigger and meaner with every passing year. The truth will set you free, but first it'll tear you apart. That's what my daddy used to say. And Lord knows he was right about that. I'm sitting here on my front porch, watching the Georgia sun paint the sky red as blood, and I can feel the weight of 20 years pressing down on my chest like a gravestone. At my feet, old Ranger's sleeping peaceful as you please, his gray muzzle twitching with whatever dreams visit old dogs. Most folks around Millerville think they know our story, how I found him half dead in that barn, nursed him back to health, gave us both a second chance at happiness. But they don't know the whole truth. They don't know about the choice I made 20 years ago that cost an 8-year-old boy his life. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 20 years ago, I was Officer Samuel Henderson, and I wore that badge like it was made of pure gold. Had the finest canine partner in 3 counties, Duke, a German shepherd with intelligence that bordered on the supernatural and a nose that could track a whisper through a hurricane. We were the team everyone called when hope was running thin and time was running out. The Patterson family had roots in Millerville going back 4 generations. Good people. The kind who'd give you the shirt off their back and never ask for anything in return. Tom Patterson ran the hardware store on Main Street, and his wife Linda taught Sunday school at First Baptist. They had 3 kids, Michael, 16, and already talking about following his daddy into business. Sarah, 14 and pretty as a picture with dreams of becoming a teacher. And little Tommy, 8 years old with freckles scattered across his nose like cinnamon on toast. It was July 4th weekend when everything went to hell. The Pattersons were hosting their annual family barbecue, the kind of celebration that brought half the town to their backyard. Kids running around with sparklers, adults nursing cold beers and arguing good-naturedly about whether the Braves had a shot at the pennant that year. American as apple pie. Safe as houses until it wasn't. Tommy disappeared sometime between the potato salad and the fireworks. One minute he was chasing fireflies with his cousins. The next he was gone like smoke in the wind. Linda Patterson's scream when she realized her baby was missing still echoes in my nightmares. Chief Carter called Duke and me in before the search parties even formed up. "Sam," he said, his weathered face grim as winter, "I need your boy to work his magic. That little Patterson kid could be anywhere in these woods, and daylight's burning." Duke and I had found lost hikers, tracked down escaped prisoners, located missing persons that other teams had given up for dead. We had a reputation built on success, and the whole town was counting on us to bring Tommy home before supper time. Hope is the thing with feathers, but sometimes those wings get clipped by the weight of expectation. I remember Duke's excitement when we picked up Tommy's scent trail behind the Patterson house. His tail was wagging, his whole body vibrating with purpose. The trail led toward the old Henderson property. Acres of dense Georgia pine and kudzu-choked ravines that had been abandoned since the family lost it to the bank years before. "Good boy," I told Duke, my hand steady on his lead. "Find him, partner. Bring Tommy home." If I'd known then what I know now, I might have said a prayer instead, might have asked God to forgive me for what was coming. But hindsight's 20/20, and ignorance can feel like bliss right up until it kills you. The first day of searching, Duke was like a hound possessed. His nose worked the ground with surgical precision. Following Tommy's scent through brambles and creek beds that would have torn a lesser dog to ribbons, we covered 12 miles of rough terrain before the sun started sinking. And every step of the way, I could feel the town's faith riding on my shoulders like a 100-pound pack. "He's close, Duke," I whispered, watching my partner's ears prick forward as he caught something on the wind. "I can feel it." The Henderson property sprawled across 300 acres of prime Georgia wilderness, all of it gone wild since the bank foreclosed 5 years back. Kudzu had swallowed the fence lines, and saplings pushed up through the foundation of the old farmhouse like nature was trying to erase every trace of human occupation. But it was the barn that drew Duke's attention, a weathered red structure listing to one side like an old man favoring a bad hip. Duke's behavior changed the moment we approached that barn, where he'd been focused and determined all day. Now he seemed agitated, circling the perimeter and whining low in his throat. His hackles rose, and he kept looking back at me with those intelligent brown eyes, like he was trying to tell me something my human brain was too stupid to understand. "What is it, boy?" I asked, following him to the barn's main entrance. The big sliding door hung open on rusted tracks, revealing nothing but shadows and the musty smell of hay gone to rot. Duke pressed his nose to the ground just inside the doorway, his tail rigid as a flagpole. The scent trail was strong here, stronger than it had been anywhere else. Tommy had definitely been in this barn, and recently. Duke led me through the maze of old farm equipment and collapsed stalls, his nose never leaving the ground. In the far corner, behind a broken-down hay baler, Duke stopped and sat. That's when I saw it, a piece of Tommy's shirt. Red cotton with a Superman logo, caught on a rusty piece of metal. My heart hammered against my ribs as I bagged the evidence with shaking hands. The boy had been here. No question about it. "Good boy, Duke," I said, but my voice sounded hollow in the empty barn. "Where did he go from here?" Duke circled the area twice, then headed for the back of the barn where a hole had been torn in the wall years ago. The trail led outside, into the deep woods that stretched for miles toward the Chattahoochee River. This was where things got complicated. The terrain behind the Henderson property was some of the roughest in the county, all steep ravines and rocky outcroppings that could turn an ankle or break a neck if you weren't careful. During my 15 years on the force, we'd pulled 3 bodies out of those woods, all of them hikers who'd gotten turned around and made bad decisions in rough country. Duke followed the scent trail with single-minded determination, leading me down a game path that wound between moss-covered boulders and ancient oaks. The air was thick with humidity and the buzz of insects, and sweat stung my eyes as we climbed over a fallen tree that blocked our path. "Easy, partner," I called as Duke pulled hard against his lead. "We need to be smart about this." But Duke wasn't interested in being smart. He was following his nose, and his nose was telling him Tommy Patterson was somewhere in these woods, probably scared and hurt and waiting for rescue. Every instinct I'd developed as a cop was screaming at me to trust my partner, to let him run the trail wherever it led. That's when the storm clouds started building. Georgia summers are notorious for their sudden thunderstorms, the kind that roll in fast and turn the world into a washing machine of wind and rain. I'd been watching the western sky all day, noting the way the clouds were stacking up like gray mountains on the horizon. By late afternoon, I could smell ozone in the air and feel the barometric pressure dropping like a stone. We've got maybe an hour before this hits. I radioed back to Chief Carter. Duke's got a strong trail, but we're getting into rough country. How rough? Carter's voice crackled through the static. I looked ahead at the trail. Duke was following a narrow ledge that ran along the edge of Miller's Ravine, a 40-foot drop onto jagged rocks and fallen timber. Even in good weather, it was treacherous. In a storm, it would be suicide. Chief, this trail runs right along the ravine edge. If that storm hits while we're out here, use your judgment, Sam. But that boy's been missing 14 hours now. Clock's ticking. Duke was pulling harder now, his excitement building as the scent trail grew stronger. Whatever lay ahead, he was convinced Tommy was close. But the wind was picking up, and the first fat raindrops were starting to spatter the leaves above our heads. I had two choices: trust Duke's nose and follow that treacherous trail along the ravine, knowing that a storm was coming that could trap us in the worst possible place, or turn back, wait for better weather, and hope Tommy could survive another night in the woods. In the movies, the hero always makes the brave choice. He follows his gut, trusts his partner, and somehow everything works out. But this wasn't a movie, and I had regulations to follow. Officer safety protocols that existed for good reasons because dead cops can't save anybody. Duke looked back at me, his eyes pleading. His whole body was vibrating with urgency, and he kept glancing toward the trail that led along the ravine. In all our years together, I'd never seen him this focused, this certain about a trail. But the sky was getting darker by the minute, and the wind was starting to howl through the trees like a living thing. Lightning flickered in the distance, followed by the deep rumble of thunder that you feel in your bones. "I'm sorry, boy," I said, my voice barely audible over the rising wind. "We can't do it. Not in this storm." Duke whined and pulled against his lead, desperate to continue. But I made the decision that would haunt me for the next 20 years. I turned us around and headed back toward the barn, following protocol instead of instinct, choosing safety over trust. The storm hit with biblical fury 20 minutes later. Rain came down in sheets so thick you couldn't see 10 feet in any direction, and the wind turned every tree into a potential projectile. Duke and I huddled in the barn while nature threw its tantrum outside, and I told myself I'd made the right choice. We resumed the search at first light, but by then it was too late. The storm had washed away every trace of scent, and Duke seemed lost without his trail to follow. He kept returning to the spot where we'd turned back, circling and whining like he'd lost something precious. It was a Boy Scout troop that found Tommy's body 3 days later, at the bottom of Miller's Ravine. The county coroner estimated he'd fallen during the storm, probably trying to find shelter. His little body was broken on the rocks, his Superman shirt torn and muddy, one small hand still clutching a stick he'd been using as a walking staff. The official report called it a tragic accident. An 8-year-old boy, lost and scared, had made a bad decision in rough terrain during severe weather. No one blamed me for not following that trail along the ravine. Everyone agreed it would have been suicide in those conditions. Everyone except Duke. My partner knew the truth that I couldn't face. If we'd trusted his nose, if we'd followed that trail before the storm hit, we might have found Tommy in time. Duke had been trying to tell me the boy was close, that we could have reached him before the weather turned deadly. After the funeral, Duke never worked another case. He'd lost something essential that night in the storm, the absolute faith in his abilities that makes a great tracking dog. He'd go through the motions when I put his working harness on, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. He'd look at me with those brown eyes full of disappointment, and I knew he was thinking about the trail we'd abandoned, the boy we'd failed to save. When you're going through hell, keep going, that's what they say. But sometimes hell is a place you make for yourself, one bad decision at a time. The night Tommy Patterson died, I learned that some choices follow you to the grave and beyond. Even now, 20 years later, I can close my eyes and feel that Georgia rain stinging my face, hear Duke's desperate whining as I pulled him back from the trail that might have saved a little boy's life. But that's getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the moment everything changed, the decision that turned me from the town hero into a man who couldn't look at himself in the mirror without seeing a coward. It was day 4 of the search, and we hadn't found so much as a boot print since discovering Tommy's shirt in the Henderson barn. The whole county had turned out to help volunteers with flashlights, church groups bringing sandwiches and coffee, even some Cherokee trackers from over in North Carolina who'd driven down to lend a hand. But none of them had Duke's nose, and Duke's nose was telling a story I didn't want to hear. The storm that had been threatening all afternoon was building into something fierce. The National Weather Service had issued a severe thunderstorm warning with possible tornado activity and flash flood watches for all the low-lying areas. Chief Carter had already called in the volunteer searchers, but he'd left the decision up to me whether Duke and I should continue. "Your call, Sam," he'd said over the radio. "But if you're going to work that ravine trail, better do it now. Weather Service says this front's going to be a real barn burner." Duke was pulling so hard against his lead that I could barely hold him. He'd picked up Tommy's scent again near the barn, stronger than before, and his excitement was building to a fever pitch. Whatever lay ahead on that narrow trail along Miller's Ravine, Duke was convinced it would lead us to the missing boy. The path itself was barely 3 feet wide in most places, carved into the side of the ravine by decades of deer traffic and erosion. To the left, solid rock rose up 20 feet or more. To the right, a sheer drop into a maze of boulders and fallen timber that could hide a body for years. One slip, one moment of inattention, and you'd be nothing but buzzard bait at the bottom of that hole. I'd walked that trail before, in broad daylight and perfect weather, and it had made my palms sweat. Now, with storm clouds building overhead and the light starting to fade, it looked like a pathway to hell. Duke didn't care about any of that. He was locked onto Tommy's scent like a bloodhound on a fox, and every fiber in his body was telling him to run that trail. He looked back at me with those intelligent brown eyes, and I swear he was trying to communicate something beyond words: urgency, certainty, the absolute knowledge that time was running out. "I know, boy," I whispered, my hand shaking as I adjusted his tracking harness. "I know you've got him. But look at that sky." The western horizon was black as night, shot through with veins of lightning that flickered like the devil's own fireworks. The wind was picking up, bending the trees and sending loose leaves spiraling through the air like confetti at a funeral. In the distance, I could hear thunder rolling across the mountains like God's own bowling ball. Duke whined and pawed at the ground, desperate to continue. He'd never been wrong before, not once in our 5 years together. When Duke said he had a scent, you could bet your last dollar that scent would lead somewhere important. But I'd also never seen him this agitated, this frantic to follow a trail. The smart thing to do was obvious. Turn back, wait for the storm to pass, resume the search in the morning when we could see what we were doing. That's what the manual said, what every piece of officer safety training I'd ever received had hammered into my head. Don't become a casualty yourself. You can't save anyone if you're dead. But the manual didn't account for an 8-year-old boy lost in the woods with a killer storm bearing down. It didn't factor in the look on Linda Patterson's face when she'd begged me to find her baby. And it sure as hell didn't consider the kind of trust a man builds with his partner over years of working together in life and death situations. Duke was telling me Tommy was close enough that we might reach him before the worst of the storm hit, close enough that another hour could make the difference between bringing home a scared little boy and bringing home a body. The first drops of rain started falling as I stood there wrestling with the decision. Fat, warm drops that splattered on the dusty trail and released the smell of approaching rain that every Southerner knows by heart. Duke whined again and looked toward the ravine trail, his message as clear as if he'd written it in the dirt. We need to go now. I pulled out my radio and called Chief Carter. Chief, Duke's got a strong trail leading along the ravine. Real strong. But this storm's about to cut loose. Static crackled for a moment before Carter's voice came through. How strong? Sam. I looked down at Duke, who was trembling with the effort of holding himself back from bolting down that trail. His nose was twitching, his ears were pricked forward, and every line of his body screamed that he'd found what we were looking for. Strongest I've ever seen him. Chief, he's certain Tommy's down there somewhere. More static. Then, Weather Service just updated the warning. We're looking at possible hail. Winds up to 70 miles per hour. That ravine's going to be a death trap if this thing hits while you're out there. I knew that. God help me, I knew exactly what I was risking. But I also knew Duke. Knew the way he worked. Knew that he was telling me we were minutes away from finding Tommy Patterson alive. The rain was coming harder now, and the first rumble of close thunder made Duke flinch. He looked up at me with those expressive eyes, and for a moment I could swear I saw something almost human in them, understanding, maybe, or forgiveness for what he knew I was about to do. Chief, I said into the radio, my voice steady despite the sick feeling growing in my stomach. I'm pulling back. Trail's too dangerous in these conditions. Copy that. Sam. Good call. Y'all get back to base camp before this thing hits. I clicked off the radio and looked down at Duke, whose expression had changed from urgency to something like heartbreak. He knew what my decision meant, understood that we were abandoning the trail when it was hottest. For the first time in our partnership, I was choosing regulations over instinct, safety over trust. I'm sorry, boy, I said, turning us away from the ravine trail. I can't risk it. Not in this weather. Duke followed, but reluctantly, looking back over his shoulder every few steps, like he was hoping I'd change my mind. The rain was coming in earnest now, fat drops that quickly soaked through our clothes and turned the trail slippery as ice. Within minutes, the storm hit with the fury of a woman scorned. We made it back to the barn just as the worst of it arrived. Rain came down in sheets so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, and the wind howled through the trees like all the demons of hell had been turned loose. Lightning turned the world into a strobing nightmare of black and white, and the thunder was so loud it seemed to shake the earth itself. Duke and I huddled in that old barn for 3 hours while nature threw its tantrum outside. I kept telling myself I'd made the right choice, that following that trail in such conditions would have been suicide. But Duke wouldn't look at me. He lay in the corner with his head on his paws, staring out at the storm with an expression I'd never seen before, defeat. Maybe. Or the kind of resignation that comes when you know something precious has been lost forever. When the storm finally passed. We went back to that ravine trail. The rain had washed away every trace of scent, turning Duke's careful tracking into an exercise in futility. He tried to work the area where we'd turned back, circling and sniffing and whining, but it was no use. Whatever Tommy's trail had been trying to tell us was gone, erased by the very storm I'd been so afraid of. 3 days later, the Boy Scouts found Tommy's body at the bottom of Miller's Ravine, less than a quarter-mile from where Duke had been pulling so desperately to continue. The coroner said he'd probably fallen during the storm, trying to find shelter from the wind and rain. But I knew better. I knew that if I'd trusted my partner, if I'd followed that trail when Duke was begging me to, we might have reached Tommy before the weather turned deadly. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, and mine were nothing but highway pavement leading straight to a little boy's grave. Duke never forgave me for that night. More than that, he never forgave himself. The aftermath of Tommy Patterson's death was like watching a slow-motion car wreck that lasted 20 years. Duke and I became living reminders of what might have been. Walking ghosts in a town that had once celebrated our successes, but now could only see our failure. The official inquiry cleared me of any wrongdoing. Chief Carter stood up in front of the county commissioners and declared that Officer Henderson had followed proper safety protocols, that no reasonable person would have attempted that ravine trail in severe weather conditions. The state police investigator agreed, filing a report that praised my sound judgment under extreme pressure and concluded that Tommy's death was a tragic accident, pure and simple. But official reports don't account for the weight that settles in your chest when a mother looks at you with empty eyes and asks why you didn't try harder. They don't measure the way guilt burrows into your bones like cancer, growing stronger with every passing day instead of weaker. Linda Patterson never said a word against me publicly at Tommy's funeral. She even shook my hand and thanked me for trying to find her boy. But I saw something die in her eyes that day, some essential faith in the world that gets extinguished when you bury your child. Tom Patterson Sr. was different. He looked at me like I was personally responsible for putting his son in the ground. And maybe he wasn't wrong about that. Duke took it harder than anyone expected. Dogs are supposed to live in the moment, people say, not dwelling on past failures or might-have-beens. But Duke wasn't just any dog. He'd been bred for intelligence, trained to understand the weight of his responsibilities, conditioned to believe that his nose could save lives. When it counted most, that nose had led us to the right place at the right time, and I'd overruled him. The change in my partner was immediate and devastating. Where Duke had once approached every case with boundless enthusiasm, now he seemed to go through the motions like a man punching a time clock. He'd put his nose to the ground when I commanded it, follow scent trails when ordered, but the spark was gone. That absolute confidence that makes a great tracking dog had been shattered like glass on concrete. It's not his fault. Dr. Rebecca Morrison told me during one of our increasingly frequent visits to her veterinary clinic, Duke had been losing weight. His appetite diminished to the point where I had to coax him to eat even his favorite treats. Dogs blame themselves for things beyond their control just like people do. He thinks he failed Tommy. He didn't fail anybody, I said, though the words tasted like ashes in my mouth. I'm the one who made the call. Dr. Morrison's expression was kind but firm. Duke doesn't understand chain of command. Sam, he just knows he had a scent trail that could have led to that boy. And somehow he didn't get to follow it. In his mind, that makes Tommy's death his responsibility. The worst part was watching Duke at crime scenes. We'd arrive at a missing person case, and I'd see that old excitement flicker in his eyes for just a moment, the instinctive response of a working dog who lives to work. But then reality would set in, and he'd remember that his judgment couldn't be trusted, that his nose had let him down when it mattered most. Chief Carter tried to be understanding, giving us easier assignments and shorter shifts. But there's no hiding from failure in a town the size of Millerville, especially when that failure costs a child his life. Every time we passed the Patterson house, Duke would slow down and look toward the backyard where Tommy used to play. Every time we drove past Miller's Ravine, I could feel my partner's shoulders slump with the weight of memory. The other officers tried to be supportive, but I could see the questions in their eyes. Would Sam Henderson freeze up again when things got tough? Could you trust him to make the hard choices when lives were on the line? Doubt is like a virus in law enforcement. Once it takes hold, it spreads until everyone's infected. Maggie bore the worst of it at home. My wife had married a confident police officer who believed in his mission and took pride in his work. What she got after Tommy Patterson was a broken man who jumped at sudden noises and spent hours staring out the window at nothing. I started drinking more than I should have, started avoiding the police station whenever possible, started making excuses for why Duke and I couldn't take certain cases. You did everything you could, Maggie would tell me, holding me while I had nightmares about 8-year-old boys calling for help in the darkness. The storm would have killed you both if you'd gone down that trail, but logic and reason don't carry much weight when you're drowning in guilt. I knew she was right. Knew that following Duke down that ravine path would have been suicide in those conditions, but knowing and believing are two different animals, and my heart refused to accept what my head understood perfectly well. Duke's health started failing about 6 months after Tommy's death. Nothing dramatic at first, just a lack of energy, a reluctance to play, a growing indifference to the things that had once brought him joy. Dr. Morrison ran every test she could think of, but the results always came back normal. Physically, Duke was fine. Emotionally, he was dying by inches. It's like he's given up, she told me during one visit. Sometimes animals do this when they lose their sense of purpose. Working dogs especially, they need to feel useful, needed. Without that, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Without purpose, working dogs often just fade away, their bodies shutting down when their spirits break. I'd seen it happen to police horses and military dogs. That gradual withdrawal from life that no medicine can cure. Time heals all wounds, but some scars run too deep. That's what my grandfather used to say, and Duke was living proof of its truth. Every day brought new evidence of his decline, the way he'd turn away from his working harness, the lack of interest in the tennis balls he'd once lived to chase, the hollow look in those intelligent brown eyes that had once blazed with determination. The town tried to move on, as small towns do. New scandals replaced old tragedies. Fresh gossip covered up painful memories. But Tommy Patterson's death had left a mark on Millerville that wouldn't fade. a reminder that sometimes good people make reasonable decisions that lead to unbearable consequences. I kept working cases with Duke, but our effectiveness was shot. We'd find missing hikers eventually, track down runaway teenagers after someone else had already located them, arrive at crime scenes only to confirm what other officers had already figured out. We'd become the backup to the backup. The team you called when you needed to say you'd tried everything. The final case we worked together was a missing elderly woman with dementia who'd wandered away from her nursing home. Duke found her scent trail easily enough, followed it for about half a mile through some woods, then stopped dead in his tracks and refused to continue. He just sat down in the middle of the trail and looked at me with those sad eyes, as if to say he couldn't trust himself anymore. Another team found Mrs. Henderson 3 hours later, safe and confused in a convenience store 2 miles away. Duke's trail had been leading in the right direction all along, but he'd lost faith in his own abilities. We both had. A year to the day after Tommy Patterson died, I came home from a particularly difficult shift to find Duke lying peacefully in his favorite spot under our old oak tree. Dr. Morrison said it was heart failure, common in older German shepherds. Nothing anyone could have prevented. But I knew better. Duke had died of a broken heart, killed by the same guilt that was eating me alive from the inside out. The funeral for a police dog draws a crowd in a small town. Half of Millerville showed up to pay their respects, including Tom and Linda Patterson. Linda even brought flowers daisies, Tommy's favorite, and placed them beside Duke's grave with tears streaming down her face. "He was a good dog," she whispered, her hand briefly touching my shoulder. "He tried so hard to find my boy." That simple gesture of forgiveness nearly destroyed me. Here was a woman who'd lost everything, offering comfort to the man whose decision might have cost her son his life. The grace of it, the undeserved kindness, was more than my guilt-ridden soul could bear. After Duke's funeral, I turned in my badge. Chief Carter tried to talk me out of it, offered me a desk job or administrative duties, anything to keep me on the force. But I was done. Done with the weight of responsibility. Done with making life and death decisions. Done with the possibility of failing another family the way I'd failed the Pattersons. Maggie stood by me through it all. God bless her. When I couldn't sleep, she'd sit up with me. When I couldn't eat, she'd make my favorite meals and coax me to try a few bites. When I talked about ending it all, she'd remind me that Duke wouldn't want that Tommy wouldn't want that life was still worth living even when it hurt. But 20 years is a long time to carry guilt that heavy, and some burdens just get heavier with age instead of lighter. 20 years later, on a sweltering July afternoon that reminded me uncomfortably of that last day with Tommy Patterson, I found myself back at the Henderson property. The county had hired me part-time to check on abandoned buildings, ironic, considering I felt pretty abandoned myself most days. At 68, I was too old for real work but too stubborn to sit home and wait for death. The Henderson barn looked worse than ever, if that was possible. The roof had partially collapsed on the north side, and kudzu had claimed most of the exterior walls. It leaned at an angle that suggested the next strong wind might finish what time and neglect had started. I was supposed to assess whether it was salvageable or if the county should just bulldoze the whole mess and be done with it. I parked my old pickup in the shade of what used to be the farmhouse and sat for a moment, gathering courage I didn't know I still possessed. This place held too many memories, too many ghosts. Every time I looked at that barn, I could see Duke's excited face as he'd followed Tommy's scent trail inside. Every shadow reminded me of the choice I'd made that night, the decision that had haunted me for 2 decades. Maggie had tried to talk me out of taking this job. "Sam," she'd said, her voice gentle but concerned, "why torture yourself? Let someone else deal with that old place." But I'd been torturing myself for 20 years anyway. At least this way, I got paid for it. The heat was oppressive, the kind of thick, humid air that makes every breath feel like drowning. Cicadas screamed in the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a mourning dove called out its lonely song. I grabbed my clipboard and digital camera from the passenger seat and forced myself to walk toward the barn. That's when I heard it, a sound so faint I almost missed it over the insect noise. A whimper, weak and desperate, coming from inside the collapsed structure. My first thought was that some animal had gotten trapped in there. Maybe a raccoon or a possum. Happened all the time in old buildings. But as I got closer, the sound became clearer, more distinct. It was definitely a dog, and from the tone of those whimpers, it was in serious trouble. "Hello?" I called out, feeling foolish for talking to what was probably a stray mutt. "Anybody in there?" The whimpering stopped for a moment, then resumed with new urgency. Whatever was in that barn had heard me and was trying to respond. I pulled out my cell phone and checked for signal 1 bar, barely enough for an emergency call if things went sideways. Then I approached the barn's main entrance, where the big sliding door hung open like a mouth frozen in mid-scream. The interior was a maze of fallen beams and scattered debris. Shafts of sunlight penetrated the damaged roof, illuminating dust motes that danced like spirits in the stifling air. The smell hit me immediately, hay gone to rot, rusted metal, and underneath it all, the unmistakable scent of an animal in distress. I followed the sound deeper into the barn, stepping carefully over broken boards and twisted metal. In the far corner, where Duke had found Tommy's shirt 20 years ago, I discovered the source of the whimpering. It was a German shepherd, trapped beneath a fallen support beam that had pinned his hind legs. But this wasn't just any German shepherd. The resemblance to Duke was so striking it took my breath away. Same intelligent brown eyes, same noble bearing, same distinctive markings around the face and ears. For a moment, I wondered if I was having some kind of heat-induced hallucination. The dog was in terrible condition. His ribs showed clearly through matted fur, and his tongue hung limp from his mouth in a way that suggested severe dehydration. Deep scars crisscrossed his body, old injuries that spoke of prolonged abuse and neglect. But it was his eyes that nearly broke my heart. They held the same look of defeat I'd seen in Duke's eyes after Tommy Patterson died, the look of a soul that had given up hope. "Easy there, boy," I said softly, approaching slowly with my hands visible. Some animals bite when they're scared and hurting, but this dog just watched me with those expressive eyes, as if he understood that help had finally arrived. The beam that had him trapped was heavy, but not impossibly so. I could see where it had fallen from the damaged roof structure, probably during the last big storm we'd had a few weeks back. The dog's back legs were pinned at an awkward angle, and from the way he was breathing, I suspected he might have internal injuries as well. I pulled out my phone and called Maggie. "Honey, I need you to call Dr. Beaky Morrison and tell her I'm bringing in an emergency. German Shepherd, trapped and injured. Probably been here for days." "Sam, be careful." Maggie's voice crackled through the poor connection. "You're not as young as you used to be." She was right about that. But looking down at this suffering animal, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 20 years, a sense of purpose, a chance to do something right. Sometimes God gives us exactly what we need, not what we want. And maybe this broken dog was my chance at redemption. I positioned myself at the thickest part of the beam and tested my grip. My back wasn't what it used to be, and my shoulders had been giving me trouble for months. But the dog was looking at me with an expression that reminded me so much of Duke, it was almost painful. "Okay, boy," I said, counting to 3 under my breath. "Let's get you out of here." I lifted with everything I had, feeling my spine protest and my muscles strain. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the beam shifted just enough for the dog to pull his legs free. He immediately tried to stand but collapsed back onto his side with a whimper that cut right through me. His collar was old and weathered, but I could still make out a tag. "Ranger," it said, in faded letters. No address, no phone number, just a name. I looked around the barn for any sign of how he'd gotten here, but there was nothing, no food, no water, no indication that anyone had been caring for him. "Ranger, is it?" I said, removing my work shirt and wrapping it around the shivering animal. "Well, Ranger, we're going to get you some help." The drive to Dr. Morrison's clinic was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Ranger lay across the passenger seat, his breathing shallow and labored. I kept one hand on his side, feeling for the rise and fall of his chest, terrified that he might slip away before we could get him proper medical attention. Dr. Morrison was waiting when we arrived, her gray hair pulled back in the same practical ponytail she'd worn for 30 years. She'd been Duke's veterinarian, too, and I could see the recognition in her eyes when she saw Ranger. "Good Lord, Sam," she breathed, helping me carry the dog into her examination room. "He looks just like—" "I know," I said quietly. I thought the same thing. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking vital signs and assessing injuries. Ranger lay still throughout the examination, those intelligent eyes following our every movement but showing no aggression despite what must have been considerable pain. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, possible internal injuries, Dr. Morrison reported after her initial assessment. These scars suggest long-term abuse, and this fresh injury to his leg is infected. Sam, this dog has been through hell. "Can you save him?" I asked, surprised by the urgency in my own voice. She looked up from her examination, her expression serious, but not without hope. "It's going to be touch and go for the next 48 hours. "But Sam, this dog has been fighting to survive. That tells me he's got spirit left in him." As Dr. Morrison prepared Ranger for surgery, I found myself thinking about Duke and that night 20 years ago when I'd made the choice that haunted me. Here was another German Shepherd in trouble, another chance to make a life or death decision. But this time, there was no storm approaching, no safety protocols to consider, no regulations to follow. This time, I could choose to act instead of hesitate. "Do whatever it takes," I told Dr. Morrison. "Money's no object. This dog deserves a chance." The surgery took 3 hours. I spent the time in the clinic's small waiting room, pacing and drinking bad coffee and wondering why this particular animal mattered so much to me. Maybe it was the resemblance to Duke, or maybe it was the look of defeat in those brown eyes that reminded me too much of my own reflection. Either way, I found myself praying to a God I hadn't talked to much since Tommy Patterson died. When Dr. Morrison finally emerged from the operating room, she looked tired but cautiously optimistic. The surgery went well, no internal bleeding, and the leg should heal properly with time. But Sam, the psychological trauma might be harder to treat than the physical injuries. This dog has been hurt badly by humans. It's going to take patience and understanding to help him trust again. I nodded, understanding more than she knew about the kind of wounds that don't show up on X-rays. "What about his history?" I asked. "Any idea where he came from?" Dr. Morrison consulted her notes. No microchip, no registration papers, but based on his build and coloring, I'd say he's purebred German Shepherd, probably around 4 years old. The collar is old, but it looks like quality leather. Someone invested money in this dog at some point, and then threw him away, I said bitterly. "People do terrible things," she agreed. "But they also do wonderful things, like driving 20 miles to save a dog they've never seen before." That night, I sat beside Ranger's recovery cage while he slept fitfully. Occasionally he would whimper, and his legs would move as if he were running from some remembered terror. I found myself talking to him the way I used to talk to Duke during his final illness. "It's okay, boy," I whispered. "You're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you anymore." As if he could hear me. Ranger's eyes opened and found mine. For a moment, we just looked at each other, two broken souls recognizing something familiar in the other's pain. Then his eyes closed again, and his breathing deepened into genuine sleep. Sometimes God sends angels with 4 paws and a broken heart, and maybe this was mine. Bringing Ranger home was like introducing a ghost to our quiet house. Maggie had prepared a bed for him in the kitchen, complete with soft blankets and easy access to water and food. But when I carried him through our front door, wrapped in one of my old jackets, he seemed to shrink into himself even further. "Oh, Sam," Maggie whispered, her hand covering her mouth as she got her first good look at him in proper light. "He's so thin. And those scars." Ranger's eyes darted around our living room, taking in every corner, every shadow, like he was mapping escape routes. When I set him down gently on his new bed, he immediately crawled underneath the kitchen table and pressed himself against the wall. His whole body was trembling, and those intelligent brown eyes held a wariness that cut straight to my heart. "He's been hurt bad," I explained to Maggie, kneeling down but keeping my distance. "Dr. Morrison says it might take months before he trusts anyone again." The first week was the hardest. Ranger would eat and drink, but only when we weren't watching. He'd wait until the house was quiet, then creep out to his food bowl like he was stealing something. If either of us entered the kitchen while he was eating, he'd bolt back to his hiding spot under the table and refuse to come out for hours. Sleep was another battle entirely. Ranger would doze fitfully during the day, but nighttime brought terrors that made him whine and thrash in his sleep more than once. I'd wake up to find him cowering in the corner, eyes wide with panic, reliving whatever hell his previous owners had put him through. It's like watching Duke all over again. I told Maggie one morning over coffee. We'd both been up most of the night with Ranger's nightmares. After Tommy died, Duke used to have the same look, like he'd lost faith in everything he used to believe in. Maggie reached across the table and took my hand. "Maybe that's why you found him. Sam, maybe you understand each other." I wanted to believe that. But understanding trauma and healing from it are two different things entirely. Ranger might have looked like Duke, but he was his own animal with his own damage to overcome. All I could do was be patient and hope that time would work its slow magic on both of us. The breakthrough came 3 weeks after I'd brought him home. I was sitting in my old recliner, reading the newspaper and pretending not to watch Ranger's cautious exploration of the living room. He'd been venturing out of the kitchen more often, but always ready to bolt at the first sign of sudden movement. That particular evening, I must have dozed off in my chair. When I woke up, the newspaper was scattered on the floor and something warm was pressed against my feet. Ranger had crept over while I slept and was lying across my boots, his head resting on my ankles. The moment he realized I was awake, he started to scramble away. But I spoke softly without moving. "It's okay, boy. You can stay there if you want." He froze, half standing, those brown eyes searching my face for any sign of threat. When I remained perfectly still, he slowly settled back down, though every muscle in his body stayed coiled for flight. "That's it," I whispered. "Nobody's going to hurt you here." We stayed like that for an hour, Ranger gradually relaxing until his breathing deepened into genuine rest. When Maggie found us later, she had tears in her eyes. "He's starting to trust you," she said quietly. "Maybe," I replied, though I knew it was more complicated than that. Trust was something you built brick by brick, and both Ranger and I had spent too many years tearing down walls to believe in quick fixes. Progress came in small increments after that. Ranger would approach me when I called, though he'd stop just out of arm's reach. He'd eat while I was in the room, though he kept one eye on me the whole time. Most importantly, he started responding to his name, tilting his head and focusing those intelligent eyes when I spoke to him. "He's smart," Dr. Schuss Morrison observed during one of our weekly checkups. "Smarter than most dogs I see. Watch this." She held up a treat and said firmly, "Sit." Ranger immediately dropped into a perfect sitting position, his posture ramrod straight and professional. Then she said, "Down," and he lowered himself to the floor with military precision. "Someone trained him well," she continued. "These aren't pet commands, this is working dog obedience. Police or military, I'd guess." That revelation explained a lot about Ranger's behavior. He wasn't just a pet who'd been abused. He was a working dog who'd been betrayed by the very system he'd been bred to serve. No wonder he seemed so lost, so unsure of his purpose. "Can you tell how old he is?" I asked. "Doctor." Morrison examined his teeth and felt along his joints. "I'd estimate around 5 years old, maybe 6. Prime working age for a German Shepherd. Someone threw away a valuable animal here. Sam, their loss is your gain." But I knew it wasn't that simple. Working dogs need jobs, need to feel useful. Without purpose, they often fade away, just like Duke had. I needed to find something for Ranger to do, some way for him to channel his training and intelligence. The answer came to me during one of our evening walks around the property. Ranger had finally started venturing outside with me. though he stayed close and jumped at every unexpected sound. We were walking along the fence line when I noticed him suddenly freeze, his ears pricked forward and his nose working the air. "What is it, boy?" I asked, following his gaze. Ranger moved toward the woods with purpose, his whole demeanor changing from anxious pet to focused professional. His nose dropped to the ground, and he began working back and forth in a pattern I recognized from my years with Duke. He was tracking something within minutes. He'd led me to a small clearing where a family of raccoons had been getting into our garbage. The evidence was scattered everywhere: torn bags, food scraps, paw prints in the soft earth. Ranger sat down and looked at me expectantly, his tail wagging for the first time since I'd found him. "Good boy," I said, and his whole body wiggled with pleasure. "You found them, didn't you?" That night, I called my old partner, Joe Martinez, who'd taken over the K-9 unit after I retired. "Joe," I said, "I need to ask you about something. If a retired police dog ended up as a stray, would there be any records?" "Depends," Joe replied. "Most departments keep pretty good records of their K-9s, even after retirement." "What's this about?" "Sam." I told him about Ranger, about the professional training and the obvious intelligence. Joe promised to make some calls and get back to me. 3 days later, my phone rang. "Sam," Joe's voice was excited, "I think I found your dog. There was a K-9 named Ranger who went missing from the Atlanta PD about 8 months ago. Belonged to an officer named Frank Morrison, no relation to your vet. Just coincidence. Missing how? That's where it gets ugly. Morrison was arrested for running a dog fighting ring. Used police dogs as bait animals to train his fighting dogs. Ranger escaped during a raid on Morrison's property and was never found." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Ranger hadn't just been abused by some random owner, he'd been betrayed by his own partner, the person who was supposed to protect and care for him. No wonder he was so broken, so reluctant to trust. "There's more," Joe continued. "Ranger was one of their best tracking dogs. Multiple commendations for finding missing persons. Sam, this dog was a hero before Morrison destroyed him." That night, I sat with Ranger on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. He was lying beside my chair now, close enough to touch, but still alert to any sudden movements. "I know what happened to you, boy," I said quietly. "I know why you don't trust anybody, but I need you to know something. Not all humans are like Frank Morrison. Some of us still believe in doing right by our partners." Ranger lifted his head and looked at me with those expressive eyes. For a moment, I could swear I saw something shift in his expression. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the possibility of trust. "We're going to take this slow," I continued. "No pressure, no expectations. Just two old soldiers learning how to live with the scars we carry. Healing isn't linear. It's a daily choice. That's what Maggie used to tell me during my worst days after Duke died. Some mornings, Ranger would greet me with what passed for enthusiasm in his damaged world. Other days, he'd retreat under the kitchen table and refuse to come out until evening. But gradually, incrementally, he began to reclaim pieces of himself. He started playing with an old tennis ball I'd found in the garage, though he'd drop it and run if I tried to join the game. He began sleeping through the night without nightmares. though he still needed to check every room before settling down. Most importantly, he started responding to his training again. Simple commands at first: sit, stay, come, but executed with the precision of a dog who remembered what it felt like to be good at something. I could see the pride returning to his bearing, the sense of purpose that had been beaten out of him starting to resurface. "He's healing," Dr. Morrison observed during one of our visits. "Still a long way to go, but he's healing. Both of you are." She was right. Taking care of Ranger had given me something I'd been missing for 20 years, a reason to get up in the morning, a living creature who needed me. His scars reminded me that survival was possible, that even the most damaged souls could find their way back to something resembling peace. 6 months after I'd found him trapped in that barn, Ranger finally let me pet him. It was a small gesture, just a brief touch to his head while he was eating, but he didn't flinch away. Instead, he leaned into my hand for just a moment before returning to his food. "Good boy," I whispered, and his tail gave the slightest wag. Sometimes the longest journey is from your head to your heart. And both Ranger and I were finally making progress on that difficult road. The call came at 2:30 in the morning on a bitter December night, jolting me from the first decent sleep I'd had in weeks. The phone's shrill ring cut through the darkness like a fire alarm, and I fumbled for the receiver with hands still thick with sleep. "Sam?" Chief Carter's voice was tight with urgency. "I need you to get down to Maple Street. House number 247. We've got a structure fire with possible entrapment." I sat up in bed, instantly awake. "Chief, I'm not on the force anymore. You know that. It's the Patterson house. Sam, Michael Patterson's place, Tom and Linda's boy. He's got his wife and 2 kids in there, and we can't locate them. The whole damn place is going up like a Roman candle." My blood turned to ice water. Michael Patterson. Tommy's older brother. The 16-year-old kid who'd helped search for his little brother 20 years ago. Now a man with his own family, trapped in a burning house while I lay safe in my warm bed. "I'll be right there," I said, already reaching for my clothes. "Sam, I'm not asking you to go in there." Carter clarified quickly. "But you know that house better than any of us. You spent 3 days searching every inch of that property. We need someone who understands the layout." I dressed quickly, my hands shaking as I pulled on boots and grabbed my coat. Maggie sat up in bed, instantly alert the way cops' wives learn to be. "What is it?" she asked. "House fire? The Patterson place?" Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Sam, not again." I kissed her forehead and headed for the door. But something made me stop and look back toward the kitchen. Ranger was standing in the doorway, fully alert despite the early hour. His ears were pricked forward, and his intelligent eyes were fixed on me with an intensity I hadn't seen since his police dog days. "Stay here, boy," I said. "I'll be back." But as I opened the front door, Ranger pushed past me and bounded toward my truck. He stood beside the passenger door, looking back at me with an expression that was impossible to misinterpret. "Ranger, no, this isn't a game." He barked once, sharp and authoritative, then sat in perfect formation beside the truck. It was the first time I'd heard him bark since bringing him home, and the sound carried all the authority of his former training. "Damn it," I muttered, but I opened the passenger door. Sometimes you have to trust your partner, even when logic tells you otherwise. The drive to Maple Street took 8 minutes that felt like 8 hours. Ranger sat perfectly still beside me, his nose twitching as we got closer to the scene. When we rounded the corner onto the Patterson Street, the glow from the fire was visible 2 blocks away. The house was fully engulfed, flames shooting through the roof and smoke billowing into the winter sky like black prayer flags. Fire trucks surrounded the property, their lights painting everything in hellish reds and blues. Firefighters moved with practiced urgency, dragging hoses and shouting orders over the roar of the blaze. I found Chief Carter near the command vehicle, his face grim in the firelight. "Sam, thank God. We've got a problem. Michael and his family were supposed to be at his sister Sarah's place for dinner, but neighbors saw lights in the house around midnight. We can't raise anyone on the phone, and the front entrance is completely blocked by debris." "What about the back?" I asked, studying the house's layout. 20 years ago, I'd memorized every entrance, every window, every possible hiding place where an 8-year-old boy might seek shelter. Fire started in the kitchen, spread through the whole back section. Front stairs collapsed about 10 minutes ago. If anyone's in there..." He didn't need to finish. That's when Ranger started going crazy. My normally quiet, traumatized dog began pacing back and forth, whining and pawing at the ground. His whole body was vibrating with tension, and he kept looking toward the burning house with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "What's wrong with him?" Carter asked. I watched Ranger's behavior, recognizing something I hadn't seen in months, the focused excitement of a working dog who'd found what he was looking for. "Chief, I think he's picking up scent. Human scent. I don't know, but look at him." Ranger had stopped pacing and was now staring at a specific section of the house, the area where Michael's bedroom used to be. On the second floor above the garage. The flames hadn't reached that section yet, but smoke was pouring from the windows. Fire. Captain Rodriguez approached us, his face streaked with soot. "Chief, we've swept the first floor. No signs of occupancy, but the smoke's too thick upstairs. We can't get a ladder truck close enough because of the power lines." "What about the garage?" I asked. "Is it connected to the house?" "Yeah. Internal door leads to a mudroom, but that whole section's compromised. We can't risk sending anyone in there." Ranger barked again, sharp and insistent, then started moving toward the garage, not running but walking with purpose, his nose working the air and his whole demeanor screaming urgency. "Sam," Carter said quietly, "your dog's trying to tell us something." I knew he was right. Every instinct developed over years of working with Duke was screaming that Ranger had found something, but the rational part of my brain, the part that had been making safe choices for 20 years, was telling me to stay put. "The garage has an outside entrance," I said, thinking out loud. "If they went in there to escape the smoke..." "It's a death trap," Rodriguez interrupted. "That section could collapse any second." But Ranger was already moving, slipping through the perimeter of emergency vehicles and heading straight for the garage. I had a choice to make, the same choice I'd faced 20 years ago in different circumstances: trust my partner's instincts or play it safe. This time, I didn't hesitate. "Chief, I'm going after him. Sam, you're not trained for this. You're not equipped. Neither was I 20 years ago, and I made the wrong choice then. Not this time." I followed Ranger toward the garage, borrowing a flashlight and breathing mask from a firefighter who was too busy to stop me. The heat was intense even from 50 feet away, and the sound of the fire was like standing next to a freight train. Ranger had found the garage's side entrance. a small door that was hidden from the main emergency response area. The door was unlocked, and when I pushed it open, relatively cool air rushed out. The garage had been spared the worst of the fire so far, but smoke was filtering in from the house connection. Ranger disappeared into the darkness immediately, his black and tan form swallowed by shadows. I followed with my flashlight, calling out, "Hello, anyone in here, fire department?" That's when I heard it. A weak voice calling from the far corner of the garage. "Here, we're here." My flashlight beam found them huddled behind Michael's pickup truck. Michael Patterson himself, his wife, Jennifer, and their 2 children, 6-year-old Emma and 4-year-old Jake. They were conscious, but overcome by smoke. Jennifer clutching the baby while Michael shielded Emma with his body. "Thank God," Michael gasped when he saw me. "Sam Henderson, is that you?" "It's me. Son, we're getting you out of here." Ranger had reached them first and was already nuzzling Emma, who was crying softly. The little girl wrapped her arms around his neck like he was a long-lost friend, and for a moment I saw something in Ranger's eyes that I hadn't seen since his police dog days, pure, focused determination. "Can you walk?" I asked Michael. "Jennifer's ankle is twisted, and the kids are weak from the smoke. I don't think we can make it to the door." The garage was filling with smoke fast, and I could hear the fire spreading closer through the connecting wall. We had minutes, maybe less, before this whole section went up. "Ranger," I called, and my dog immediately looked at me with those intelligent eyes. "Find the way out, boy. Show us the way." Without hesitation, Ranger moved toward the side door, stopping every few steps to look back and make sure we were following. I helped Michael get Jennifer to her feet while he carried Jake, and I scooped up Emma, who clung to me with surprising strength. The journey to that door was the longest 30 seconds of my life. Smoke was getting thicker, and the heat was building to dangerous levels. Halfway there, Jennifer stumbled and nearly fell, but Ranger immediately returned to her side, positioning himself so she could lean on him for support. We burst through that door into the cold December air like swimmers breaking the surface after nearly drowning. Emergency personnel swarmed us immediately. Oxygen masks and blankets and urgent questions about injuries. But I only had eyes for Ranger, who sat calmly beside the garage as firefighters took over the rescue. His job was done, and he knew it. The look on his face was one I remembered from Duke's best days, the quiet satisfaction of a working dog who'd done exactly what he was born to do. "Mr. Henderson." Emma Patterson's small voice caught my attention. She was sitting in an ambulance, an oxygen mask over her face, but her eyes were fixed on Ranger. "Is that your dog?" "Yes, sweetheart. His name is Ranger. He saved us," she said simply. "When we were scared, he came and told us everything would be okay." Michael Patterson approached me as the paramedics finished checking his family. His face was streaked with soot, and his eyes were red from smoke, but he was grinning like a man who'd just won the lottery. "Sam," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't know how to thank you. If you and Ranger hadn't found us—" "Your brother," I said quietly. "I should have saved your brother 20 years ago. I'm sorry. Michael, I'm so damn sorry." Michael's expression shifted, and for a moment, he looked exactly like the 16-year-old boy I remembered from Tommy's funeral. "Sam, you can't carry that guilt forever. Tommy's death wasn't your fault. I made a choice that night, the wrong choice. And tonight you made the right one." He looked toward Ranger, who was accepting attention from Emma and Jake like he'd been their family dog for years. Maybe that's what Tommy would have wanted for his death to mean something. To teach someone how to be brave when it really counted. I watched Ranger with the Patterson children, seeing something in his posture that I hadn't noticed before. The fear was gone, replaced by the confident bearing of a dog who remembered his purpose. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and Duke's son had just proven he was every bit the hero his father had been. Sometimes God gives us exactly what we need, not what we want, and tonight Ranger had been exactly what the Patterson family needed. So here I sit on my front porch again, 3 years after that December night that changed everything. The Georgia sun is painting the sky in those same shades of gold and crimson, and Ranger is sleeping peacefully at my feet, his graying muzzle twitching with whatever dreams visit old heroes. The town looks different now, or maybe I'm the one who's changed. The weight that pressed on my chest for 20 years has finally lifted, replaced by something I'd almost forgotten how to feel: peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting your mistakes, but the kind that comes from understanding that sometimes the longest journey is from your head to your heart. Ranger stirs and lifts his head, those intelligent brown eyes focusing on something in the distance. It's the Patterson family, walking up our driveway for their weekly Sunday visit. Emma, now 9 years old, breaks into a run when she sees Ranger, and my dog's tail starts wagging with genuine joy. Jake toddles behind her, still mastering the art of running on stubby legs. "Uncle Sam!" Emma calls out, throwing her arms around Ranger's neck before turning to hug me. It's what she's called me since that night, Uncle Sam, like I'm family instead of just the old man who helped save their lives. Michael and Jennifer follow at a more sedate pace, Jennifer carrying their newest addition, baby Sarah, named after Michael's sister. They've made this pilgrimage every Sunday for 3 years now, sharing dinner and stories and the kind of easy companionship that comes from having faced death together and lived to tell about it. "How's our hero today?" Michael asks, scratching behind Ranger's ears. My dog accepts the attention with dignity, though I can see the contentment in his relaxed posture. "Getting old," I admit. "We both are, but content." As we settle on this porch to watch the sunset, I think about the confession I started 3 years ago, the weight of guilt I carried for 2 decades. Some folks say confession is good for the soul, and maybe they're right. But I've learned something else. Forgiveness doesn't always come from the people you've wronged. Sometimes it comes from a broken dog who teaches you that love finds a way to heal even the deepest wounds. The truth will set you free, but first it'll tear you apart. In the end, though, being torn apart was exactly what I needed to find my way back to whole. Sometimes the most important truth is the simplest one. We're all just doing our best with broken hearts, hoping love will be enough. Friends, if you've made it this far in Sam and Ranger's story, you understand something profound about second chances and the healing power of unconditional love. Like Sam, many of us carry guilt from decisions we made decades ago, moments when we chose safety over courage, protocol over instinct. We tell ourselves we were being reasonable. But late at night, we wonder, what if? Sam's 20-year journey from devastating guilt to peaceful redemption reminds us that it's never too late to choose love over fear, action over hesitation. Ranger, broken and betrayed, found his way back to trust and purpose through patient care and gentle persistence. Their story proves that the longest journey isn't measured in miles. It's the distance from a wounded heart to a healed one. Whether you're 55 or 75 carrying regrets from your past, or simply feeling like your best years are behind you, remember this: every sunrise offers a new chance to be the person your younger self needed, to choose courage over comfort, to believe that love, both given and received, has the power to transform even the most damaged souls into something beautiful again. What moment from your past would you handle differently if given a second chance? Have you ever experienced the healing power of caring for someone or something that needed you more than you needed them? Share your thoughts below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.